Eleanor had been standing in that hallway for 11 seconds when her entire understanding of the past 4 years rearranged itself into something she could no longer look away from. She had not meant to hear it. She had arrived early to Caroline's dinner party, 10 minutes ahead of the time on the invitation, because she was always early. It was a habit she had carried since childhood, this quiet compulsion to never make anyone wait. Caroline had greeted her warmly at the door, taken her coat, and pointed her toward the sitting room at the end of the hall. The laughter of other guests was already rising from the main room at the far end of the house, and Eleanor had been making her way toward it when she heard his voice coming through the half-open door of Caroline's study. She stopped without deciding to stop. His voice had that particular quality it had when he believed no one was listening, lower than usual, relaxed in a way it rarely was in public, carrying that easy humor he saved for moments he considered private. She had always loved that voice. She had told him once, in the early days, that his voice made her feel safe, and he had laughed and kissed the top of her head, and said something sweet that she had since committed to memory. She stood in the hall and she heard him say, "She'll pardon me, she always does." There was a pause, the kind that exists when someone on the other end of a phone is speaking. Then he laughed, softly. "Don't worry about Eleanor. That's just how she is." She stood there. She did not move. She did not breathe loudly enough to be heard, and in the span of perhaps 5 seconds, something that had been quietly bending in her for a long time finally broke, not with a crash, but with the clean, quiet sound of something giving way under a weight it had been carrying too long. Eleanor had a strong face. People who met her for the first time often used the word composed, and they meant it as a compliment, though it had occasionally been delivered as a mild criticism by people who mistook composure for coldness. She was not cold. She felt things with a depth that occasionally surprised her. But she had learned, somewhere in her childhood, and then again in her early adult years, that feelings were not best expressed in the moment of their arrival. They needed to be sat with, examined, understood. Only then could they be spoken cleanly. She turned, quietly, and walked back down the hall. She found Caroline in the kitchen, touched her on the arm, said something about a sudden headache, apologized for missing what was sure to be a wonderful evening, and left. She drove home in silence. She did not turn on the radio. She did not call anyone. She sat in the specific kind of quiet that comes after something important has happened, when the mind is still processing, and the heart is already several steps ahead. She had met Oliver Hale 4 years ago, at a mutual friend's birthday celebration, on a houseboat on the Thames. She remembered the evening with the kind of clarity that only the genuinely significant moments of one's life tend to carry. It had been late June, warm for England. The kind of evening that tricks you into believing summer will stay. She had been standing near the edge of the boat, watching the lights of the city shimmer on the water, holding a glass of something sparkling that she was barely drinking, when a man appeared beside her and said, without preamble, "I've been trying to think of something interesting to say to you for the last 20 minutes. I haven't managed it. I'm Oliver." She had turned and looked at him properly. He was tall, not unusually so, but enough to require her to look slightly upward. He had dark hair, beginning to silver at the temples, which made him look distinguished, in a way that she suspected he knew about and probably did not mind. His eyes were the kind of gray that changes depending on the light, and they were watching her with a directness that she found unexpectedly pleasant rather than uncomfortable. Most people who approached her at parties did so with an agenda she could detect within the first sentence. This man seemed to have declared his agenda immediately, which was the agenda of honesty, and it caught her off guard. "Eleanor," she said, "and I appreciate the honesty. Is it working?" he asked. "Ask me in an hour," she said, and turned back to the water, but she was smiling. He asked her in an hour, and by then she already knew the answer, though she was careful not to say so too quickly. She was 37 years old, and she had learned the difference between genuine interest and the performance of it, and what she felt that evening was genuine interest in a way she had not felt in several years. He was funny without trying to impress her with his humor. He was curious about her work. She was a translator, working primarily with French and Italian literary texts, and he asked real questions, not the polite surface-level questions people asked when they were waiting for their turn to speak again. He listened. He picked up details she had mentioned and returned to them later. When the party began to break up around midnight, he asked if he could call her, and she said yes, and she meant it. He called the next morning. Not a text. A phone call. She had been in the kitchen making coffee when her phone rang, and she saw his name on the screen, and felt a warmth she recognized from long ago, from the early years of being young and open to the world, before caution had become a reasonable habit. They spoke for 40 minutes about nothing particularly important and everything that mattered. He told her about his work. He ran a small architectural firm that specialized in restoration projects, bringing old buildings back to their original dignity while making them functional for modern life. She found this beautiful, the idea of caring enough about something old and worn to spend your time and skill returning it to what it had once been. He told her about his daughter, Lily, who was 9 years old and obsessed with marine biology, and kept a notebook of every species of fish she could identify. He told her without drama, without apology, as a simple fact of his life, that he expected her to accept, or not accept, on her own terms. She appreciated the cleanness of it. She had been with men who hid complexity, and men who made their complexity into theater. Oliver did neither. They had dinner 3 nights later, then again the following week. Then he cooked for her at his house in Islington, a narrow, light-filled Victorian terrace that he had restored himself over several years, the original cornicing intact, the floorboards sanded and re-oiled, everything carefully preserved. She had walked through the rooms and felt she understood something fundamental about him from the choices he had made. This was a man who believed in taking care of things. She let herself fall. She did it slowly, and then all at once, the way most falling happens when you have spent a long time resisting. Her friends noticed immediately. Her closest friend, a woman named Dorothy who had known her since university, told her over lunch one afternoon that she looked lighter. "You look like someone has taken weight off you," Dorothy said, which was exactly right. Her sister, Clara, who lived in Edinburgh and called every Sunday without fail, said, "I haven't heard you laugh like that in years." Clara was 2 years younger than Eleanor and had always been the more outwardly emotional of the two of them, and she said this with a kind of relief that Eleanor recognized as the relief of someone who has been quietly worried. Eleanor, who chose her words carefully, said, "I'm happy." She had said the sentence before in her life, of course, but there is a difference between saying a thing and meaning it with the full weight of your attention, and this time, she meant it fully. What she did not know, what she could not yet know, because she trusted the evidence in front of her, and the evidence in front of her was careful, and warm, and attentive, was that Oliver Hale was a man who maintained 2 lives with the kind of organizational discipline most people reserve for professional projects. He was methodical about it in the same way he was methodical about everything else. He kept a calendar that no one else ever saw. He had a second phone that he replaced every 8 months. He told each woman in his life a version of the other woman that conveniently made the other woman into someone fading, someone from the past, someone who was complicated but manageable. He had been doing this for a long time before Eleanor. It was not that he had started this life with cruelty. He had started it the way most people start things that become problems, gradually, through small decisions that each seemed manageable in the moment, and which accumulated over time into something much larger than any single choice. He told himself, and believed it with a sincerity that was its own kind of damage, that he was not hurting anyone. He told himself he was compartmentalizing, that he was keeping both parts of his life clean and separate, that no one was being deceived in any way that truly mattered. This is how people convince themselves of things that are not true. They rephrase the truth until it fits through a smaller door. Eleanor had been with him for 8 months when she first felt something was not quite right. It was not a large thing. It was a name mentioned once in the context of a work story, and then mentioned again a week later in a different context, and the 2 mentions did not align cleanly. When she asked about it, casually, Oliver answered immediately and without visible discomfort, and the answer was plausible, and Eleanor filed it away as a possible misunderstanding on her part. But she did not forget it. She was a translator by profession, and translators are trained to notice when meaning shifts, when the same word in a different context carries a different weight, when something does not quite mean what it appears to mean. She noticed things other people did not notice, and she noticed this. Still, she said nothing further. She was fair, and fairness requires that you do not treat suspicion as fact. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when Oliver was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter where he had left it, and Eleanor, who was standing at the counter making tea, saw the preview of a message on the screen. She had not tried to see it. She had simply been there when it appeared. She read the first line without choosing to read it, because the eye goes to the bright thing on the screen before the mind has time to decide otherwise. She read enough to understand what it was. When Oliver came downstairs, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around her mug of tea. She looked at him and told him what she had seen, not in anger, not in tears, but with the careful, measured language of someone who has taken the time to organize their thoughts before speaking. He sat down. He put his face in his hands. And then he told her about the woman, whose name was Vivien, and what he said was this: it was over. It had been a mistake. It had started before Eleanor, and he had been trying to end it. He had not known how to tell her. He was sorry, in a way he could not fully articulate, and he was asking her to give him the chance to show her that he meant it. Eleanor sat across the table from him for a long time after he stopped speaking. Then she asked him questions, clean, specific questions that required specific answers. He answered them. Some of the answers hurt. All of them were, she believed at the time, honest. She did not make a decision that day. She went home to her own flat, and she spent several days inside her own thoughts. And at the end of those days, she made a choice that she would later understand had been the wrong one. Not because forgiveness is wrong, but because she had forgiven him before he had fully earned it. And in doing so, she had established, without knowing it, the first terms of a pattern. She chose to stay. He was genuinely changed in the weeks that followed, or appeared genuinely changed, which at the time looked like the same thing. He was present in a way he had not been before. He put his phone down when she was in the room. He was transparent about his schedule. He introduced her, for the first time, to his daughter Lily, who was by then 10 years old, and who looked at Eleanor with the careful, assessing gaze of a child who understands more than adults give her credit for. Eleanor and Lily liked each other immediately. Lily wanted to show Eleanor her fish notebook, and Eleanor had sat on the edge of Lily's bed for nearly an hour, looking at every page, asking questions about the species that Lily had identified, and Lily had answered with the particular enthusiasm of a child who has found an adult who is actually listening. Walking home that evening, Eleanor had thought, "This is what I want. This is the shape of the life I want." And so she stayed, and she worked at it, and she believed in it. What she was not able to see, because no one can see a thing they are not looking for, was that Oliver had not ended the pattern. He had adjusted it. He had become more careful. He had learned from the close call, not in the way she hoped, not in the way that leads a person to change, but in the practical, logistical way that leads a person to make fewer mistakes. He changed his phone password. He became more intentional about the times and places that were associated with his other life. He did what people who are skilled at maintaining secrets do. He used the crisis as information. The months that followed were among the happiest of Eleanor's adult life, and she would think about this later with a particular kind of pain. Not because happiness was false, she was genuinely happy, and what she felt was real, but because she had been happy inside a life that was not the life she thought it was, and the knowledge of that, once it arrived, changed the quality of every memory. The good things did not become bad. They became complicated in a way she had not asked for, and did not deserve. She stopped checking her phone at dinner, because she had stopped feeling the need to. She told Dorothy that she had arrived somewhere she had been trying to get to for a long time. She called Clara on Sundays, and laughed in a way that Clara said she had not heard in years. She spent weekends in Islington, cooking in Oliver's kitchen, reading in his garden, while Lily played on the grass, falling into an easy domestic rhythm that felt like the beginning of something solid and lasting. She trusted him. And trust, once given fully, is a difficult thing to take back. Not because you are weak, but because taking it back requires you to admit something about the person you love that you would rather not know. And human beings, when given the choice between a difficult truth and a comfortable continuation, will almost always choose the continuation, for as long as the choice remains available to them. Eleanor was not unusual in this. She was not naive. She was a person in love with a person she had chosen to believe in, and she believed in him in the complete way that she did most things. She would not receive the information that changed everything for another 2 years. But on the night of the dinner party, standing in Caroline's hallway, with his voice coming clearly through a half-open door, she received it all at once, not as rumor, not as suspicion, not as something she would have to weigh or consider, or give the benefit of the doubt. She received it in his own words, in his own voice, in the specific, comfortable language of a man who was completely relaxed in what he was saying, because he had said it before, and nothing had gone wrong. She'll pardon me. She always does. She walked to her car. She sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. She felt the cold of the November evening through the glass, and she was aware of her own breathing, steady and even, and she was aware that she was more calm than she expected to be, and she understood what that meant. It meant something had changed that could not be changed back. She drove home, and she made tea, and she sat at her kitchen table in the quiet, and she began to understand, properly, fully, without the soft focus of love blurring the edges, what the past 4 years had actually been. Not what she had believed them to be, not what she had wanted them to be, what they had actually been. It was not the worst thing anyone had ever felt. Eleanor was honest with herself about that. There was no category of suffering in her that confused this pain with the truly devastating things that happen to people. But it was her pain, and it was real, and one of the things she had always believed, quietly and firmly, was that the only way through something real was to be honest about what it actually was. She sat in the kitchen until the tea went cold. And then she sat a little longer. Outside, the November wind moved through the trees on her street, and somewhere on the road a car passed slowly, its headlights crossing the ceiling of her sitting room for a moment, before the darkness returned. The house was very quiet, the kind of quiet that is not empty but full of the particular presence that settles into a space when someone has just made a decision they will not go back on. Eleanor was not crying, she was thinking. She was thinking with the specific clarity that arrives, sometimes, when you have been confused for a long time, and then something resolves the confusion with a single sentence. She was thinking about what it meant that he had spoken that way. She was thinking about the word always. She was thinking about what always said about the way he understood her, not as a person with limits and choices and a dignity that could be reached, but as a mechanism, a predictable process, something he had mapped and could rely on. She had been, in his mind, a certainty. She thought about each of the 3 times she had forgiven him. She had forgiven him each time genuinely, fully, without conditions she could not keep. She had forgiven him because she believed that people were capable of change when they were truly sorry, and because she had believed he was truly sorry, and because she had believed the relationship was worth the effort. Those beliefs had been sincere. That forgiveness had been real, but it had been received as something else entirely. It had been received as a guarantee. She sat at her kitchen table until it was very late, and the street outside went quiet, and the heating in the house clicked off, and she wrapped her cardigan a little tighter, and she let the night move around her. She was not hurrying herself. She had always believed that the important things deserved the time they needed. By the time she finally turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, she had not cried, and she had not shouted, and she had not called anyone. She had simply sat with the truth of the thing, until the truth was no longer something happening to her, but something she had absorbed and understood, and was now, very quietly, ready to carry forward. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling. Oliver had not yet tried to call. He would not know she had been there. He would arrive home at whatever hour the dinner party ended, and he would set his phone on the nightstand, and he would sleep easily in his restored house in Islington, undisturbed by any sense that the ground had shifted. He did not know, yet, that this time was different. But Eleanor knew, and for the first time in 4 years, the most important information in the situation was the information that only she had. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time, but she was calm, and she was clear, and she knew what she was going to do, and knowing, really knowing, without doubt, is a kind of rest even when sleep will not come. Outside, the wind continued in the trees. The night continued around her. And Eleanor lay in the dark and waited, patiently, for morning. Oliver called at 8:47 the next morning. Eleanor knew he would call in the morning, because he always called in the morning. It was one of the small rituals of their relationship that had always felt warm, and now, in the light of what she knew, felt like data. He would have noticed she was not at the dinner party. Caroline would have mentioned it, or someone else would have, and he would have sent one text the previous evening. She checked her phone and found it. Sent at 10:15. Caroline says you left early. Everything okay? And having received no reply, he was now calling. She answered on the third ring. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice had that tone she knew well, the tone that was not quite worry, but was performing the shape of worry. "Are you all right? Caroline said you had a headache." "I'm fine," she said. "I'm at home. I was going to come over last night, but I thought you might be asleep. You should have texted me." "I didn't need anything," she said. There was a pause. She could hear the sounds of his house in the background, the particular acoustics of his kitchen, the hiss of his kettle. "Are you sure you're all right?" he said. "You sound strange." She thought about how to begin. She had been thinking about it since early morning, when she had woken at 6 and lain in bed for a while, before getting up and making coffee, and standing at her window, watching the street below come slowly to life. She had decided she would be clear, and she would be honest, and she would not be cruel. "I was at Caroline's last night," she said. A very small pause. "I know," she said. "You arrived and then left quickly." "I arrived before you knew I was there," she said. "I was walking down the hall to the sitting room. The door of the study was half open." She said nothing else. She let the sentence complete itself, in whatever way it needed to complete itself in his mind. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "Eleanor," he said. "I heard what you said," she told him. "All of it. I'd like you not to tell me that I misheard, or that I misunderstood, because I didn't. I have very good hearing, and I understood it clearly." He did not say she had misheard. He let out a breath that was long and slow, the kind of breath that precedes a significant conversation. And then he said, "I'm coming over." "You don't need to," she said. "Eleanor, please." She considered this. She had not intended to have the conversation on the phone. She had intended to have it in person. She owed it to both of them to be present for it. "All right," she said. "Come over." He arrived in 30 minutes, which meant he had left almost immediately. He arrived in the coat she had helped him choose last winter, a good dark wool coat that suited him well, and she noticed this with a detachment that surprised her, that she could look at him and see, simultaneously, the man she had loved for 4 years, and the man whose words she had heard last night, and that these two images were not as difficult to hold together as she might have expected. She had done the work of the night. She had processed. She was, this morning, very still inside herself. She made tea. She made it because it gave her hands something to do, and because hospitality was a thing she did without thinking, which she recognized, even as she was doing it, was something Oliver had relied on. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table she had sat at alone the previous night, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then she said, "Tell me the truth, not a version of it, the truth." He told her. It took a long time, and there were things in it that she had suspected, and things that surprised her, and she listened to all of it with her hands around her mug, and her eyes on his face, and her mind working steadily through everything he said, filing it, sorting it, understanding it. The woman he had been speaking to on the phone was named Vivien. He and Vivien had met 3 years before he and Eleanor had met, so Vivien had come first, chronologically, which Eleanor had not known, and which changed certain things about the shape of the story. He had never fully ended things with Vivien when he and Eleanor began. He had told himself he would, and then he had not, and then time had passed and the situation had become more complicated, and he had managed it. He used that word, managed, rather than resolved it. "What does Vivien know about me?" Eleanor asked. He paused. "She knows you exist. What does she think I am to you?" Another pause. A past relationship. Something unresolved. Eleanor looked at him steadily. "So I am a version of what she is to me." He did not answer, which was its own answer. She asked more questions. He answered them. He did not try to minimize what he had done, which she appreciated, because it meant she did not have to push. He was honest, in the way that people are honest, when they understand the game is over, and honesty is the only card that has any value left. Then he said what she had known he would say. He said he was sorry. He said it in the way that was not performance but real regret. She could tell the difference, and this was real. He said he understood if she could not forgive him, and then he said that he hoped she would try, and that he would do everything differently, and that the way he had spoken about her last night, that specific phrase, "She'll pardon me, she always does," was something he was ashamed of, and he wanted her to know, It was not what he actually believed. It was not the way he saw her. It had been careless and wrong, and he wished he could take it back. She listened to all of it. She let him finish completely. She did not interrupt. She was still. When he stopped speaking, she sat for a moment with the quiet. Then she said, "Oliver, I believe that you're sorry. I want to be clear about that. I think you mean what you're saying, and I think you feel what you say you feel." He looked at her with the particular hopefulness of a person who can see a door still slightly open. "But," she said, "what I heard last night was not new information about you. What I heard last night was the sentence that explained all the other information I already had, and what it told me was not that you had done something wrong, which you have, and which I have forgiven before. It told me what you understood my forgiveness to be." He waited. "You understood it as something I would give regardless," she said. "Not something I chose, not something that required anything of you. You understood it as a fixed feature of me, like a habit, or a reflex, something that you could count on, something that cost you nothing, because it was always going to arrive." He said her name. "I need you to hear this," she said. "Not because I want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you. But I need you to understand that what I heard last night was not the sentence of a person who was afraid of losing me. It was the sentence of a person who did not believe that losing me was a real possibility." The kitchen was very quiet. Oliver looked at her across the table, and for the first time in the 4 years she had known him, she saw something in his face that she had not seen before. Not guilt, which she had seen. Not shame, which she had seen. Something else. Something that arrived when a person understands that a consequence they had not taken seriously has become real. "Tell me what I can do," he said. She shook her head gently. "I don't think that's the right question anymore." He stayed for another hour. He spoke, and she listened, and she said what she needed to say, and the conversation moved through the places that it needed to move through. She was kind. She was clear. She did not raise her voice or say things she did not mean. She was, as she had always been, fair. When he left, he held her at the door for a moment, and she let him, because she was not angry, and holding him goodbye was not a contradiction of the decision she had made. She stood at the window and watched him walk to his car. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, before starting the engine. Then he drove away. She stayed at the window for a little while after he was gone, watching the street settle back into its ordinary Saturday morning. A neighbor walking a dog, 2 children on bicycles, the sound of a radio somewhere nearby. Then she turned away from the window. She went to the kitchen and washed the 2 mugs. She dried them and put them back in the cupboard. She wiped down the counter. She did these small, ordinary things with her full attention, because she had always believed that how you do the small things is connected to how you do everything else. Then she sat down at her desk. She had a translation due in 10 days, a novel by a French author, a story about memory and loss, and the way the past refuses to stay where you put it. She opened her laptop and found the document and read back over the last 3 pages she had worked on. The prose was beautiful. The writer had a way of describing the moment when something ends, the particular light of it, the specific texture of the silence afterward, that Eleanor thought was among the most precise writing she had ever translated. She had been working on finding the English that held the same weight as the French without losing anything in the crossing. She found her place, and she began to work. Outside, the Saturday morning continued. The dog walker came back the other way. The children on bicycles were gone. A thin November sun moved through the trees and put light on the floor of her study, in long, pale rectangles that shifted slowly as the morning passed. Eleanor worked, and the morning moved around her, and she was present in her own life, in a way that she had not been able to fully be. She understood this now, for quite some time. Dorothy called on Tuesday. She had heard, through the web of mutual friends that is the particular geography of a certain kind of London life, that Eleanor and Oliver had separated. She did not ask how she had heard. She simply said, "Tell me what you need," and Eleanor, who had not yet cried in any of the days since the dinner party, found herself unexpectedly moved by the simplicity of the question. "I think I just need things to be normal for a while," Eleanor said. "Lunch on Thursday," Dorothy said. "The Italian place in Fitzrovia. I won't ask questions you don't want to answer." "Thank you," Eleanor said. She had not cried yet. She was aware of this, and she thought about it sometimes. Whether the absence of tears meant something, whether she was not letting herself feel what she should feel, whether composure in this context was healthy, or a habit she had built so long ago, she could no longer distinguish it from genuine feeling. She thought about it honestly, and she concluded that she was not suppressing anything. The feelings were there. She felt them. She felt the loss of what she had believed she had, and the loss of the lily-shaped future she had built in her imagination over the past year, and the particular, specific sorrow of understanding that the warmth she had felt in Oliver's kitchen, in his garden, in the rooms of his carefully restored house, had been real on her part, and complicated on his, in ways she had not known about. She felt all of this. She simply felt it quietly. She went to lunch with Dorothy on Thursday. They went to the Italian place, and they ate pasta, and talked about other things, Dorothy's work, her son's new school, a film they had both seen recently, and Eleanor was fully present in the conversation, because she had always been able to be where she was, and this had not changed. She did not, in the weeks that followed, speak badly about Oliver. Not to Dorothy, not to Clara, not to anyone. Not because she was protecting him. She had no particular desire to protect him. But she had spent enough years translating other people's words to understand that what you say about a person, once said, becomes part of the public record of who they are, and she was not certain she had enough information to define him, even now. She knew what he had done to her. She did not know why. Not fully. Not in the way that would let her understand him as a complete human being, rather than as the person who had hurt her. She thought, sometimes, about Vivien. She had no anger toward Vivien. That had surprised her. She had expected anger, or at least some complicated feeling, but what she felt instead was something closer to sorrow, and a recognition that Vivien had also been in a situation she had not chosen, and that the two of them had more in common than either of them would have wanted. She did not reach out. It was not the time, and perhaps would never be the time. But she thought about her, and she wished her well in the quiet of her own thoughts, which cost nothing, and changed nothing but felt, to Eleanor, like the right thing to do. Oliver sent a message at the end of the first week. It was long and careful, and said everything she had expected it to say. That he was sorry, that he was thinking about what she had said, that he would understand if she did not want to hear from him, but that he hoped she would let him try. She read it fully. She thought about it. Then she put the phone down and did not reply. At the end of the second week he sent another, shorter, asking simply if she was all right. She replied to that one, "I am. Please take care of yourself." She meant it. Both the taking care and the please. She did not mean it as warmth or as a door. She meant it as the truth, which was that she wished him no harm and had nothing further to give. On a Friday evening at the end of the third week, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk, the one she used for things she did not need regularly but was not ready to throw away, and she took out an envelope. Inside the envelope were some photographs from the first year of their relationship. She looked at each one. She looked at her own face in them, and at his, and she looked at what happiness had looked like on her at that age, in that season. She was not looking for something to feel. She was looking at the truth of it, the truth that it had been real, that the good had happened, that she had loved, and had been, in whatever complicated way he was capable of, loved in return. Then she put the photographs back in the envelope, and put the envelope back in the drawer, and closed it. She went to the kitchen and made dinner. She made a simple pasta dish with the last of the cherry tomatoes from the pot on her windowsill, because she grew tomatoes every year, in a pot on the south-facing sill of her kitchen window. She had done this since she first had a flat with a south-facing window, which was 15 years ago. Every year she grew the same type, small, sweet, thin-skinned, the kind that split almost before they were ripe. Oliver had eaten them, and said they were the best tomatoes he had ever tasted, and she had believed him, and she still believed him, because that had been true. She sat at her kitchen table and ate her dinner, and outside the November evening went dark around the street, and the lights of the house opposite came on one by one in the upper windows, and a cat moved along the garden wall below her window, with the absolute confidence of a creature that does not question its right to be wherever it is. Eleanor watched the cat until it was gone from view. Then she washed her bowl, dried it, put it away. She sat back down at her desk and opened her translation. She worked until 11, and the work was good, and she went to bed that night feeling, underneath the layers of everything that had happened, the particular quiet confidence of a person who has been through something real, and has not pretended otherwise, and has not fallen apart, and has found, on the other side of it, that they are still entirely themselves. Which was, she thought, the only thing she had ever truly needed to know. She did not know, yet, that Vivien was going to call. She did not know, yet, that the story had a further turn, and that the turn would bring her, on a cold afternoon in February, to a coffee shop in Marylebone, that neither of them had been to before, sitting across a small table from a woman she had never met, who had dark eyes and chapped lips, and who set her cup down with slightly shaking hands and said, "I need to tell you some things, and I need you to know that I'm not here to defend him. I'm here because I think you deserve the full picture." She did not know, yet, that the full picture was larger than what she had already seen. She did not know yet that what she understood as the end of something was, in a quieter, less dramatic way, the beginning of something else. She sat at her desk and worked on her translation, and the night held the house gently, and the cat was gone from the garden wall, and the street outside was quiet. She did not know yet. But she was about to. Vivien Fletcher was 34 years old, and she had a way of holding herself that suggested she had spent a significant portion of her life making herself smaller than she was. Eleanor noticed this when Vivien walked into the coffee shop on the cold February afternoon, noticed it in the way she moved through the room, shoulders slightly forward, eyes finding Eleanor, and then briefly dropping before coming back up, the particular posture of someone who is unsure of their welcome and has learned to assume, before any evidence one way or the other, that they are probably not welcome. Eleanor had been there for 10 minutes already. She had chosen a table near the window, away from the busiest part of the room, with 2 chairs rather than a row of seats, so that they would be facing each other rather than sitting side by side, which she thought would be easier for both of them. She had ordered tea for herself, and asked the person who brought it to give them a few minutes before taking another order. When Vivien spotted her across the room, Eleanor raised her hand briefly, not in a wave, but in the small gesture of acknowledgement that says, "I see you. You are in the right place." She saw Vivien's shoulders lower slightly in response. Vivien sat down. She was wearing a blue coat that was good quality, but old, the kind of coat that has been well cared for rather than recently replaced. She had dark brown hair cut to her collar, and the dark eyes Eleanor had noticed from across the room, and she was, Eleanor thought, the kind of person who would be immediately likable if she were not so clearly in a state of significant anxiety. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Vivien said. "You asked me honestly," Eleanor said. "I respond well to that." Vivien had found Eleanor through a friend of Caroline's. The chain of connection was complex, and had involved more than one person passing a message, which Eleanor thought said something about the networks of women, who know things, and find ways to communicate them, when the formal routes are unavailable. The message that eventually reached Eleanor had been simple. "A woman named Vivien would like to speak with you, if you're willing." No explanation, just the request. Eleanor had thought about it for 2 days. Then she had said yes. A second person came to take their orders. Vivien ordered a coffee, and Eleanor ordered another tea, and they sat in the brief, slightly formal silence that precedes a conversation that both parties know will matter. Then Vivien said, "I found out about you 8 months into what Oliver and I had. Someone told me, a friend of a friend. I went to Oliver, and I asked him directly, and he told me you were someone from before, that things between you were over, but that the ending had been complicated, and that he was being a coward about finalizing it." Eleanor listened. "I believed him," Vivien said. "Not entirely. I had doubts, but I believed him enough to stay, because I wanted to believe him. I think that's important to say. I wasn't only deceived, I also made choices that allowed the deception to continue." Eleanor appreciated this, the honesty of it, the refusal to position herself as entirely without agency. "He said the same category of thing to me," Eleanor said. "When I found out, the first time, he told me you were in the past." Vivien looked at her. "The first time? There were 3 occasions on which I knew something was wrong," Eleanor said. 3 times I forgave him. I thought I was forgiving him because he was genuinely trying to change. He told me about one of those occasions," Vivien said quietly. "He was with me when it happened. He came to me that night, after he'd spoken to you, and I thought something was wrong with him. He seemed upset. I asked him what had happened. He said there had been an argument with someone from his past, that it was being resolved, that he didn't want to talk about it. He was upset for a few days, and then he seemed better, and I thought it was behind him. Eleanor sat with this for a moment. The image of it, Oliver arriving at Vivien's in the aftermath of Eleanor's forgiveness, not changed, not resolved, not returning to a life that was correcting itself, but simply continuing, was not one she had had before, and it settled into her understanding of the past 4 years, and changed the light on certain things she had remembered in one way, and now needed to remember in another. "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor asked. Not with suspicion, with genuine curiosity. Vivien looked at her hands. "Because I ended things with Oliver 6 weeks ago, after I found out, really found out, not just suspected, the full extent of it. And when I ended things I was angry, and I was hurt, and I said a lot of things. But after the anger passed, I kept thinking about you. I kept thinking about what you didn't know. And I decided that you deserve to know it. Not because it changes anything. I know it doesn't change what you've already decided. But because—" She paused, and looked up, and met Eleanor's eyes directly for the first time in the conversation. "Because I think we were both made to feel like we were the whole story, and neither of us was. And I think you should know that." The coffee shop was warm. Outside the window, the February street was cold and pale, people passing quickly with their collars up, a bus moving slowly through the mid-afternoon traffic. Inside, there was the sound of cups and conversation, and the warmth that comes from a room full of people who are mostly comfortable, and mostly not paying attention to anyone but themselves. Eleanor looked at Vivien across the small table. "Thank you," she said. "I mean that." Vivien nodded. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Did you love him?" Eleanor asked. "I thought I did," Vivien said. I think I loved the person he let me believe he was, which is different." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I understand that." They sat together for nearly 2 hours. They did not spend all of that time talking about Oliver. In fact, after the first hour, they talked about other things. Vivien was an architect, which Eleanor found quietly, ironically interesting, and when she mentioned it, Vivien gave a short, humorless laugh, and said she knew. She had found that out herself only recently. They talked about their work. They talked about the particular experience of being a woman in their late 30s, navigating the question of what comes next. They talked about the specific difficulty of trusting your own judgment when your judgment has let you down, or, more precisely, when someone you trusted has used your judgment against you. When they finally left the coffee shop and stood on the February pavement outside, Vivien said, "I don't know if we'll ever see each other again." "I don't know either," Eleanor said. "I hope you're all right," Vivien said. "I am," Eleanor said, "and I hope the same for you." They stood for a moment in the cold. Then Vivien nodded, once, and turned and walked in the direction of the underground. Eleanor watched her for a moment. Then she turned in the other direction and walked to where she had parked. She sat in the car before starting it. She thought about Oliver, and about the architecture of what he had built, the careful partitions, the managed information, the particular skill of giving each person enough of the truth to seem honest, while withholding enough to maintain the structure. She thought about what that must have required of him, in terms of sustained effort and attention, and she thought that the energy he had spent on that construction might, directed elsewhere, have been extraordinary. She thought about Vivien's shoulders when she walked into the coffee shop, and about how they had come down slightly by the time she sat down, and come down further over the course of the afternoon, and about how, when they parted on the pavement, Vivien had stood straighter than she had when she arrived. She thought about herself, and about the specific freedom she had been feeling, in fragments, and then more consistently, in the weeks since she had left Oliver's voice behind in Caroline's hallway. She started the car. She had a translation to finish. She had a trip she had been postponing for 3 years, a week in Bologna, where the light in February was extraordinary, and the food was among the best in the world, and she had always wanted to go alone, with no agenda, with nothing but time and attention. She had looked up flights the previous week, and found a reasonable fare for a departure in 3 weeks, and she had not yet booked it, because she had not yet decided whether to, and the decision still felt like it belonged to a version of herself who needed to be more deliberate about things. She thought, book the flight. She pulled out of the parking space and drove through the pale February afternoon, And by the time she reached home, she had decided, and the decision felt simple and clean and like exactly the right next thing. She booked the flight that evening. She put the dates in her calendar, and she felt, when she saw them there, a small and genuine lift. The translation was going well. She had found the English for a passage that had resisted her for 2 weeks. A paragraph about the way the past reasserts itself, not as a wound, but as a presence. Something that exists alongside you, that walks with you without demanding to be carried. The French was spare and precise, and she had finally found the English that honored it. She read it back twice, and felt the particular satisfaction of work that had arrived at the right form. She went to bed that night thinking about Bologna, about the red roofs, and the long porticos, and the market she had read about, and about walking through it alone in the winter light, with nowhere particular to be, and no one waiting for her. She understood, not recovered. Recovery was not a destination you arrived at and then inhabited. It was a process that moved alongside you, that demanded occasional attention, that would probably surprise her sometimes with its timing. There were mornings when she woke, and the first thought she had was about Oliver, and the thought was not clean, it was complicated, weighted, carrying the specific texture of grief that attaches to love even when the love was not what it appeared to be. She did not fight those mornings. She let them be what they were, and then she got up, and made coffee, and went on. But she was also, genuinely, herself. More fully herself, perhaps, than she had been in some time. Outside her window, February moved across the city. In 3 weeks, she would be in Bologna. She would walk under the long porticos in the morning, and eat at a small table in the evening, and read and work and be very quiet and very present in the middle of her own life. The thought arrived, and she held it for a moment before sleep came. It felt like something she had earned. She came back from Bologna with 40 pages of translation done, a small ceramic bowl from a market stall, and a particular quality of quietness inside herself that she had been hoping for and had not been entirely sure she would find. The week had been exactly what she had imagined, and also different in the ways that the real version of anything is always different from the imagined version. More textured, more specific, more itself. The light in February was not what the light in summer would have been, but it was beautiful in its own way. Pale, thin, arriving and departing quickly, making the ochre of the walls glow briefly, before the afternoon closed over it. She had walked for hours. She had eaten alone at small tables in restaurants without feeling lonely, which was the particular skill of the solo traveler, the ability to be the only person at a table and feel complete rather than incomplete. She had worked every morning from 8 until noon, and walked every afternoon, and slept more deeply than she had in months. She had thought about Oliver sometimes. The thinking was different from how it had been before Bologna, less immediate, more distant, more in the register of understanding than of feeling. She thought about what she now knew, which was more than she had known before Vivien, and she thought about what she would probably never know, which was the interior of his reasoning, the specific logic by which he had arrived at the life he had built. She was not sure it mattered anymore. She had stopped needing to fully understand the thing in order to be finished with it. She came home to her flat, and it looked the same as she had left it, and felt, as familiar places always do after an absence, both very known and slightly strange. She unpacked, put her washing on, opened the window in her study to let the air in, and sat down at her desk. There was a message from Dorothy, asking about the trip. There was a message from Clara, asking the same. There was a message from her editor, saying the translation had come in looking wonderful, and when could they discuss the next project. There was nothing from Oliver, which had been the case for 3 weeks now. She had not replied to his last message, and after that, the messages had stopped. She did not know whether this was resignation or respect, but either way she found it appropriate. She replied to Dorothy and Clara with brief descriptions of the best meal she had eaten, which was the only meaningful information either of them actually wanted. She replied to her editor with 3 possible dates for a call. Then she made coffee and sat in the chair by her study window and watched the early spring beginning to arrive in the trees on her street. The first green, tentative, still surprised by itself, the buds just opening on the branches of the plane trees. Spring in London. She had always loved it. The particular shock of green after the gray, the return of light that arrived earlier than you expected every year and delighted you every year anyway. She thought, I am all right. She thought this, not as reassurance, not as something she needed to convince herself of, but as a simple observation of a true state of affairs. She was all right. She was here, and she was herself. And the cup of coffee in her hands was very good coffee, and the trees outside her window were coming back to life. This is what she had, not as compensation for what she had lost, but as itself. The morning, the tree, the work on her desk, her sister in Edinburgh who called every Sunday, Dorothy, who met her for lunch in Fitzrovia and did not ask questions she was not ready to answer, the tomato plant she would put on the kitchen windowsill again in April, the translation of a French novel about memory and loss, and the way the past keeps walking with you, which she was rendering into the best English she could find. These were the things that were hers. They had been hers throughout, even when she had been too busy looking at Oliver to notice them fully. She opened her laptop. She found her place in the translation. She began to work. Several streets away, in the particular direction that London grows toward the center of itself, a bus moved through the morning traffic, and somewhere in the city a market was opening, and in a school nearby, children were arriving, in the ways children arrive, running, calling out, carrying things they had made at home, to show someone who would be interested. The city continued in its enormous, indifferent, generous way, making room for everything that happened inside it, absorbing grief and joy and ordinary Tuesday mornings, with equal and magnificent patience. Eleanor worked until noon. Then she made lunch and ate it by the window. Then she went back to her desk. And that is how it looks, the life after. Not dramatic, not triumphant in the way of film endings, not sordid, because nothing is ever fully sordid, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. It looks like a morning at a desk. It looks like a cup of coffee and a tree coming back to life. It looks like work that you are good at and have chosen freely, and that is yours. It looks like a woman at a window in the early spring, watching the light move on the plane trees, and being completely, unremarkably, and very solidly herself. Oliver Hale remarried 3 years after Eleanor ended things. She heard about it through Caroline, who had remained friendly with both of them in the mild, careful way that mutual friends navigate the aftermath of endings. The woman he married had met him through work. She was an interior designer, apparently, and they had been brought together on a renovation project, which Eleanor thought had a certain irony to it. She heard that he seemed settled, that those who knew him said he was more present than he had been, more careful, more attentive. She wished, genuinely, that this was true, because Lily was still his daughter, and Lily deserved a father who showed up. Vivien, Eleanor heard through a different channel several years later, had left London. She had taken a position with a firm in Edinburgh, which Eleanor found mildly remarkable. Edinburgh, where her sister Clara lived, in the city of grey stone and volcanic rock and 7 hills, and apparently was doing well. She had heard that Vivien seemed lighter, happier, whatever that meant when reported at this distance. Eleanor had gone to Edinburgh several times herself in those years, to see Clara, and she had sometimes thought about the possibility of walking down a street and seeing Vivien there, and she had felt no dread at the thought, just a kind of soft openness. If that happened, she would say hello. She would mean it. She did not see Vivien in Edinburgh. The city was large enough to make coincidences rare, and the particular streets their lives moved through did not happen to intersect. But she thought of her sometimes. And she thought, sometimes, of the February afternoon, in the coffee shop in Marylebone, and the way Vivien's shoulders had come down over the course of 2 hours. And she thought that whatever had happened between both of them and Oliver Hale, and whatever had been lost, there had been that afternoon, and it had been real, and the two of them had sat in a warm room on a cold day, and been honest with each other, and that was something that belonged to both of them, and was not complicated by anything else. Eleanor turned 43 on a Thursday in October, the year the translation of the French novel was published. She received, on that day, an advance copy in the post from her publisher, and she opened it, and read the dedication page, and then the first paragraph, and she felt the particular feeling that comes with the completed thing, the work that had been words on a screen for months, now fixed and physical, and permanent, in a way that words on a screen never quite feel. She took the book to the chair by the window, and read for an hour. Then she called Clara, and then Dorothy, and then she made dinner, and she ate it at her kitchen table, with the book beside her plate, and the autumn evening coming down quietly outside. The tomatoes on the windowsill were the last of the season. She would pick them tomorrow. the final few that had held on into October. Small, sweet, thin-skinned. They had been extraordinary this year. She looked at them. Then she went back to the book, and the evening went on around her, and she was in it fully. Not elsewhere, not in the past, not managing some internal distance from her own life. She was in the chair, in the light, in the evening, in the October that existed right now, and she was, at the age of 43, very thoroughly and very quietly, and without any fanfare whatsoever, alive. Which was, she thought, exactly enough.